Oh, hello, Twin Peaks.
We didn't see you come in.
Episode 8, Meredith, Bibbs, Alonso. We have things to discuss.
Just a few, just a few.
Yeah, so let's now and forever abandon all hope that this is going to be a show about a story. It is not.
I mean, that was a story. There
are stories.
Yeah.
Things are being related, but it is not. This is not going to be a narrative in any traditional sense. You may never see Dale Cooper not be Dougie Jones on this episode, on this season. You may not.
He may be gone forever.
Yeah.
You may not.
Would you really be surprised?
Yeah, you may not get the answer to a goddamn thing, and it doesn't matter. That's not what the show is about. That's not what the show has really ever been about.
The show is about fucking with you. That's what the show is about right now. There were a lot of comments, I think, as people were watching it. I saw my Twitter feed populate with just, God help whoever is recapping the show. Because this episode, man, there's never seen anything like it. I have, but that's besides the point. Like it's crazy art house.
It's not on series television.
No,
though.
that's weird.
I will say, I would go on a limb and say this is the least narratively structured hour of series television in the United States in the history of television.
And I loved every minute.
It was great.
It was so fantastic because this was David Lynch at his like short film best. This is video art on Showtime. I mean, it was just absolutely fantastic to see, what I'm used to seeing in like maybe 20, 30-minute short films into a 40-minute piece that might actually tell the backstory of Bob and all the
or
other.
the universe? I don't know, or Laura Palmer. Okay, so basically here's what happened. At the end of the last episode, Bob, AKA Dale, had escaped from prison. The guy he escaped with betrayed him at the beginning of this episode, shot him, and then a whole bunch of raggedy ghosts show up, and the guy's like, oh God, I didn't expect raggedy ghosts, and he leaves.
And it's the guy who was walking down the hallway in the last episode, who was also the guy in the cell next to Matthew Lillard.
And they pull Bob's face out of Dale in like this sort of big pile of garmonbozia. Yeah. Meanwhile, 70 years earlier, a nuclear bomb goes off.
In White Sands, New Mexico, and I think the show is sort of intending to present this as a turning point in evil in the universe, as sort of the birth of something despicable. To quote another killer Bob, Robert Oppenheimer, his quote at the time, borrowing I think from the Mahabharata, was, "I have become the destroyer of worlds." The crossing the line of creating and detonating the atomic bomb took us to a whole new dark place. And I think the show is implying that that's the birth of Bob.
And much like Godzilla and the atomic bomb, we get Bob.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of different levels of that. One, I think the creation of the atomic bomb was a sort of a tipping point in America, and it created new levels of paranoia and new, also inflated ideas of our own greatness, which are also ideas that Twin Peaks has sort of played with. The sort of perception of positive Americana and of course the seamy underbelly, and the idea that that has worked on a larger level, but also just splitting the atom. Has that ever happened before on the planet? There is like this mind-expanding, unbelievable amount of power, destructive power and conceptual power that was released all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And a big part of Twin Peaks takes place in another plane of reality where people view things on a completely different level, to the extent that we look at them and we cannot understand any aspect of them. How could the nuclear bomb not sort of if we're trying to get the attention of gods, a nuclear bomb is a really good way to do it.
Sure, no. I mean, it's definitely, I think it's a tipping point. And again, this is our opinion.
Yeah.
We're not saying this is totally what it means, because who the fuck knows? I don't even know that Lynch necessarily knows what it means, but it doesn't have to necessarily mean anything. I think so much of this episode operates on that kind of dream logic level that's so exciting to watch with Lynch, where you're like, okay, on one level of my head, I can't put this together, but on another level, this makes complete sense, or this all fits together
somehow. We're making connections somewhere. We're gonna make different connections, which is why it's awesome.
But like, for example, what's the thing with the gas station and the sped up stop motion Shaggy guys? I have no idea.
Well, there was a gas station and there was some sped up stop motion Shaggy guys.
Yes, and then later, the girl who winds up with a bug crawling into her mouth.
A frog bug.
A frog bug.
Like a flying rabbit also.
Yeah, walks by the gas station.
Makes you think, right?
Yeah, totally. It's all right there.
I think my cat really knew though. So when the frog thing was crawling into her mouth, my cat like runs out of nowhere, jumps on the like stand where the TV is, and starts swatting at it. And I was like, get it,
Cat
Lulu.
knows it's evil.
Here's the weird thing. I had just watched the first part of the new Gong show that ABC is doing, the revival of it. And one of the contestants this week was a woman who puts a full-grown tarantula inside her mouth.
Oh God.
Plays the harmonica, and then the tarantula crawls back out.
How many gongs did she get?
I think she made it all the way through the end of her performance, strangely enough. But it was like, but I was watching it with a friend of mine who was like, no, can't watch it. And then of course we watch Twin Peaks, and there's another bug in another mouth. And it's like, well, this is the theme of the evening.
So we got the giant watches the nuclear explosion on a movie screen, which some people are thinking is the same theater as from Mulholland Drive. Wouldn't surprise me.
Why not?
But then upon watching the nuclear explosion, he of course floats in the air and shoots sort of gold stuff out of his head.
Bits of the universe.
And a woman watches this with, I'd watch it too, it's rather interesting. And then he sort of, his brain gives birth to a sort of bubble that has Laura Palmer in it, because obviously. And I think, well, again, if you want to like follow your metaphor about sort of like, the birth of evil, it's also got to be, evil has to have victims.
Sure.
There's a binary equation there. You can't be evil if you have no impact.
Well, but
that's a possibility. Or I was thinking more of the idea that like that they need to insert an equal and opposite force of good in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, but was Laura Palmer that good?
I think she was a trigger. I think Laura Palmer was neither good nor evil. I think what the giant is showing us here is that Laura was put in place to set a series of events in motion, and that it's up to the people around her to imbue her with good or evil.
There is something sort of YA fiction about this, where it's like, this isn't just a small town of Washington, it's the nexus of a multi-dimensional battle between good and evil.
But to be fair, that was always in the series.
Yes, obviously, the lodges were nearby.
Well, I think there's this attempt sometimes when we revisit material later on to force meaning and force portent and foreshadowing, where perhaps if you were doing it originally and organically, there would have been none. I look at, it's an obvious example, but like these Star Wars prequels, which, it couldn't just be there was this one great Jedi who went bad and killed everyone. There's got to be a chosen one. There's got to be all of this sort of, ladling on of get it, we'll get there eventually kind of mentality. I don't really pick that up here, but again, Lynch is working with stuff to confuse you, stuff to delight you. Some of the imagery here is gorgeous. I've never seen a nuclear explosion look this good, for whatever that's worth.
And the threnody to the victims of Hiroshima for 52-string instruments. Not a piece of music I was familiar with before, but very effective in this case.
But again, and he's working with that, and he's working with iconography. And some of the iconography is, look, a mushroom cloud is something that we all have our own ideas about.
Sure.
But then we have frog cockroach rabbits.
I'm just imagining being an exec at Showtime, getting this episode turned in and being like, we said yes to this.
I think, I've been on the fence. I come every other episode, I'm like, oh, I really liked it, and I'm not sure. But like seeing this, and I think this is really what solidified it for me, is that I'm like, no, Lynch has a plan. We might not ever know what it is.
Sure.
He might not even know what it is. But he is definitely telling a 13 or 18 hour long story.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm delighted. Like, I don't know, just seeing this, because this was so reminiscent of a lot of like the old video art that I used to watch, and just, it really called back to Peter Campus, who's one of the first and most masterful of the video artists, who really got that whole technique of distortion and visual effects. And just seeing that play on television. I don't know. I got super excited, and I took a lot of meaning away from this episode. I took a lot of story. I took a lot of not just foreshadowing, but I saw that I'm like, okay, well, he tells the story about the atom bomb in this small town in the 40s, and these people just dying when they hear the words of the woodsman.
Right.
It's all ties in, and maybe we're not meant to see it right away, or maybe some of us just see the connection a bit clearer.
I'm perfectly happy with no big answers here, and I think one of the reasons that I think a lot of people brought this up before, were sort of disappointed with Westworld by the end, because we got ahead of the show when we figured out where it was going to be.
Yeah.
And this is not about connecting the dots. This is not a show that's interested in that sort of like, oh, this turns out to be a clue for that. Like it's just a bunch of stuff, and I think the original Twin Peaks even had threads that necessarily didn't go anywhere, and they didn't have to.
I'm gonna say two things about that. One is I rewatched all of Twin Peaks, as I've said before, just before this one began. Twin Peaks resolved almost all of its mysteries eventually. Like it was actually really good about it, and most of the mysteries that it hadn't resolved by the end of the original run of the show were relatively recent. Like they got to stuff, and I think that is part of Twin Peaks, and I don't think it's entirely unreasonable to expect answers, but of course it's David Lynch, and we very well may not get them. But to your point, there is a wonderful collection of interviews, I think it's like Lynch on Lynch, that I've read, and he was talking about his movie Lost Highway, which I feel is one of his more underrated films. Lost Highway is a film that, much like what we're seeing now in Twin Peaks, in fact, I think it's actually more relatable to Twin Peaks than Mulholland Drive or even Eraserhead. There are elements of narrative, there are elements of drama, there are elements of crime and murder, but David Lynch described it as it's a mystery in which I took out all the clues. It's all there, it makes sense if you know how to think about it, but the linchpins, the things that would say, oh, well, this is connected to that, I just took that out. And just to see if you would be interested, and you know what, it's fascinating.
And I think there's an emotional connectivity that happens, even if it's something that we have to sort of make up for ourselves, that still makes it work. You were mentioning a friend of yours who is an advocate of Transcendental Meditation, and that was giving her an insight into the show, which I know Lynch has been a big advocate of.
Yeah, she made a whole post about how she first did her first series of Transcendental Meditation last week, and then at the end of it, she's like, and then I'm watching Twin Peaks, and now I get it. I feel like it goes hand in hand. Now I'm not familiar with that, so I said to Michelle, I was like, hey, we should go grab lunch next week because I want to hear.
I was like, please get an explanation. I want to hear more about this.
Me too.
And a thing that I had not really been super focusing on, but that Dave pointed out was, with the appearance of the Nine Inch Nails last night, is that all of the musical choices, the live performances along the way, have been thematically linked.
Yes.
And I need to go back and pay closer attention to the lyrics of those songs, because that's something that frankly I missed, but I totally believe that's a thing.
Well, this track was She's Gone Away, and it definitely, you hear it and you immediately think, oh, it's about Laura Palmer, but it's got a lot more going on. I think, I really think it has a lot more to do with Bob and being a huge Nine Inch Nails fan. Also, you guys should see the Nine Inch Nails music video series that David Lynch directed.
Well, and Nine Inch Nails actually did a lot of the soundtrack to Lost Highway.
Yes. And
which is one of the best soundtracks ever.
So that's how I actually discovered David Lynch, was Lost Highway, Nine Inch Nails, growing up in the 90s and super into the goth industrial scene.
If you're enjoying the show and you're one of the many people who sort of glossed over Lost Highway, I think it might trigger some things about what's going on right now in the series. The one thing I will say is that I'm watching all of these bits at the Roadhouse, and I kind of like how, no matter how surreal Twin Peaks is, it is kind of like Saturday Night Live, and it does have its own musical guest every week. The Roadhouse became a very hip establishment.
Right?
They've got 9 Inch Nails playing in a town which, unless the population boomed, has a population of what, 50,000?
And 9 Inch Nails is only playing 3 North American shows this year, so one of them was apparently in Twin Peaks.
Small fucking town, not a big house.
Whoever's curating the Roadhouse really has next level taste, and is getting some astonishingly big names for a small town.
It's Jacques, or one of those Renault.
But he's got a really good booker, though.
Yeah. Well, and that was another shock, was having the Renault, but it's not the one that died. It's not the one.
Another brother we never met before.
Yeah.
Which is just bizarre and weird. And you would think the Bookhouse Boys would have been sort of paying attention to him by now if he's running underage call girls. But we're getting a little off topic because this episode has this is kind of David. You know what I was watching? I was watching the once it hit the 1950s and this sort of the weird ghosts or demons or whatever they are come out into the fields. I got a real Ed Wood Beast of Yucca Flats vibe out of this.
Coleman Francis.
Very Coleman Francis, where it's just, it feels like an old horror movie that doesn't make a lot of sense. It feels like, you watch like early Ed Wood movies, are basically all Ed Wood movies, basically, and they're the work of an auteur. Not a good auteur, like he doesn't make good movies, but they are very much in their own space. And any horrific element may or may not make sense, but you can tell it makes sense to the filmmaker.
But no,
I think that's interesting to create that correlation.
But see, about this, if you just take that 40-minute chunk without the Bob escaping or Dale escaping, and then the end back at the Roadhouse, you take that 40 minutes, and it is a story. It is a complete story into itself that follows a beginning, middle, and end. No, it's an open ending because you don't know what happens to the girl with the bug in her mouth.
Right.
But it is like one of actually the most coherent shorts I've seen out of David Lynch.
True. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I just feel like this sort of, he's creating like a corollary I think is very, very clear. In the 1950s, we were living in this post-nuclear age of war and anxiety, and that affected our storytelling. And I don't think, I would be very surprised if he evoked all of those old horror movies by accident.
Oh yeah.
No, sure.
Like certainly not. I don't know what he wants us to get out of it. Maybe nothing. David, help.
I mean, hey, maybe we'll see that 40 minutes pop up on Mystery Science Theater 3000.
That'd be awesome.
I know,
That'd be really funny, actually. It's basically them just going,
ultimately, I don't really know what I saw, but I'm very glad I saw it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's nice that something like this can find not just a place to get made, but an audience. And a part of me really wants to. We talked about in our review of Sense8 and sort of our overlook about Sense8, how we're bringing some shows back, and we're kind of bringing them back. And a lot of the times we're bringing shows back just sort of nostalgia, just sort of bump you, just sort of like, hey, remember Full House? Remember it? It's pretty good, right? But then you can take that dynamic. You can, you want me to revisit Twin Peaks? Well, fuck you. I'm going to do whatever I want. Twin Peaks.
Well, and I think also what's interesting about the sort of the revival, the new sort of silver age of television, whatever it is that we're going through right now, is so often looked at as a writer's medium. Like people don't talk about who directed a lot of these episodes. I mean, a few critics will, but for the most part, we talk about writers and showrunners and creators and that kind of thing. And this is a writer-director, like visually and narratively, like really putting the stank on something, and unapologetically.
Yeah,
so.
but also a lot of good series, the directors change every episode.
Well, of course,
So this is one that is unabashedly David Lynch.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
no, he's directing all of these. I just found out today Spike Lee directed all the episodes of the She's Gotta Have It Netflix show that's coming in November.
Yeah.
So that's I think where we're going to start seeing the directorial voice asserting itself more.
Well,
in that way.
It's basically you just look at who's there every time. Who's there every episode? It's the producers, it's the writers.
Sure, no,
the
I get it.
Usually they're just sort of asked to pick up a house style. But yeah, when we do think about directors in television, we think about people like Cary Fukunaga doing every episode of True Detective, and we think about David Lynch doing this because they have the opportunity to not only put their stamp on something. Oftentimes, a pilot director gets to sort of dictate what the show will look like, but then stick around and make sure no one fucks with it.
Yeah.
And can you imagine, real fast? Can you imagine David Lynch directing the first few episodes and then handing off any of the scripts for the more recent episodes to anybody?
No.
I mean,
what it would be like.
Obviously, the original Twin Peaks, he didn't direct all of them, but that was much more of a sort of, in a lot of ways, a classic, standard, traditional network show.
That he wrapped weirdness around.
Compared to this one, certainly. So yeah, that would be a tricky one.
Yeah, I'm picturing the best directors in the business getting the script for this episode and just saying, good luck, make it Twin Peaks. Wait, what? No idea.
So yeah, I think if you're watching this show, last night's episode, you are either out or you are doubly in.
Yes.
Pretty much.
And so it's exciting.
I know.
Yeah.
What's going to happen next?
I'm not going anywhere. My Sundays are free.
There you go. Come back and see us.